Hey there, everyone. Zach Shefska here from Market Smart. We'll be getting started relatively soon, just in a couple moments. So if you're here to learn how to project your planned gift potential, you're in the right place. So hang tight, and we'll be getting started shortly. In the meantime, I'm going to mute myself and share the screen. So just hang on, and we'll be get going in just a few minutes. Hi there, everyone. Zach Shefska here. We see some folks coming in and joining us. We'll get started in just a minute or two, maybe a minute after the top of the hour. We'll just give folks a moment or two. If you're here for how to project your planned giving potential, you're in the right place. If you came for something else, I can't really help you. Anyway, stay tuned, hang tight for a moment. And as you can see, it's kind of dreary and gray behind me. We're not having the best of weather here. Outside Washington, D.C., it's like 40 degrees and raining, which is probably as not fun as it can get. Hopefully it's a bit better in your neck of the woods. Anyway, we'll hang tight for just a minute, let some folks join us. I'll mute myself in the meantime, and probably a minute after the top of the hour, we'll get started. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started here. So hey there, everyone. Zach Shefska here from Market Smart. Some of you may have been expecting my colleague Jeff Giannato, one of our senior solution advisors here at Market Smart. Unfortunately, something came up and Jeff isn't able to conduct today's presentation. So you've got me, our backup act, but nonetheless, we'll walk you through everything here, and you should be able to get a lot of value out of what we're going to talk about today. With that being said, just a few housekeeping items. If you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar interface, there's a question and answer and also a chat tool. Feel free to use either of those as we get moving here. I want to address as many questions as possible and make sure that you're getting the information that you need to take next steps at your organization when you go back, once you sign off here and you're back in the office. So feel free to use the Q&A or the chat function. I'll be checking both of them as we're moving throughout the presentation. And that's kind of, everything that we need to square away. I guess the other thing I'll mention would be the slides and the recording will be shared after this, so you'll have access to those just as well. But without further ado, why don't we jump into things here? So here's what we're going to cover today. All of you obviously have some interest in understanding projecting planned gift potential, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give step-by-step instructions for how you can do that within your existing database of donors. So we're going to talk about what's the potential within that database that you have at your disposal. Those constituents that could, in theory, potentially make a planned gift to your organization. Now, we all know that planned gifts can come from folks that have never even interacted with you or given to your annual fund or anything like that. Unfortunately, we have no way of capturing that in a model, in a potential model. So we're really just going to focus our attention on what's the potential and what's the capacity within the existing database. Now, the second thing, after we go through the step-by-step instructions, is we're going to talk about how can we project out planned giving revenues. When are they actually going to be realized? Both from step one, the potential that we've kind of described. We're going to map out where does that actually come into the organization, but also then specifically for your existing legacy society. So what's the quantitative value that's actually there that could, in theory, come in and will come in over the following years? And the third thing that we'll talk about is how you can receive a free opportunity analysis from us here at Market Smart. So everything that we're going to talk about leading up to that is what we do professionally. It's something that we offer. And one of the benefits of being an attendee to today's webinar is you'll have an opportunity to get access to that for free. Now, bear in mind, everything we're going to show you, it's what we do. So more power to you if you want to take that on your own. We're trying to make that knowledge more accessible so that in case you have the resources at your organization, you can do it. So let's jump right into it. How do you project your planned giving potential? The first things first, we need to think about who our audience is. Who's our audience for this model? And I'll talk about this point for a little bit here. When I say audience, we're talking about who out of your existing database can you actually engage? Who has the potential to make a planned gift? And then when we think about that, we have to think about how we're engaging with them. Is it through emails? Is it through print? Is it through one-to-one engagement? And now the reason I bring this up is because it's very important to recognize here that there are much easier ways, easier in quotes, ways to create models. And I'll give you a very tangible example here. I'll actually come out of the presentation and I'll click on this link. If any of you are familiar, here at MarketSmart, we actually have a bequest calculator. It's very simple. Calculate your bequest potential. Put in a number of donors and we'll calculate your bequest potential. The thing is, that's actually not that in-depth. This is kind of high level and you can really poke holes in it, and it's not going to be the type of information that you want to convey to your board, to your leadership, or that you want to use in really advanced conversations about strategies, budget allocation, things like that. So we're going to go a bit more in depth. We're going to talk about the audience that you have and the media opportunities, the media channels that you have to engage with those people. And it's a big, involved part of this process, but incredibly worthy. Then after we understand who our audience is and what channels we can communicate with them with, we need to project what the response rate will be from actually engaging with those individuals. And then once we're there, we can start to understand, okay, where do they break out into consideration stages? So what percentage of our database has actually disclosed to us that they've left a planned gift to our organization, who's showing immediate interest and who's showing deferred interest, and which subset of our database actually has no interest in making a planned gift to us whatsoever. Now again, go to the bequest calculator, plug in 10,000 donors, and it'll say you've got X amount in bequest potential. Sure, it's a number. This we're going to be much more involved, but much more accurate, and we can really stand behind the calculation and the model that we're creating. Now, fourth, what we need to do is once we've kind of separated cohorts of individuals into different consideration stages, we need to think about how likely we are to actually close and realize that planned gift from someone in that consideration stage. So someone who's told us they've left the gift to us in their will already, there's a higher chance that we're actually going to realize that gift than someone who's, say, told us they have deferred interest in making a planned gift. The likelihood that we actually realize a planned gift from someone in that deferred group is much lower than someone who's disclosed that we're already in their will, for example, and we'll get in depth on what that looks like. And fifth, we need to be thinking about what's the average bequest amount for your organization. And there's some industry averages that we can refer to. And then, of course, there's your own database. And we're going to talk about calculating your own average bequest amount and importing that into this model. So this is all part one of the really three pieces of today's presentation that we're going to talk about, but there's 5 steps here for us to walk through. And as we go through, I'm going to give you a case study as well. So we'll be using an anonymous organization that we've done work with to show you some examples of what this actually looks like. Okay? So step 1, the audience and marketing mix. Really, we're addressing here, who will you actually engage? Now, the way that we do this here at MarketSmart, and again, I'm kind of going to show you how the sausage gets made, for lack of a better term. I should walk you through how we do this type of analysis for our clients and our prospects and anyone who's really interested in it. What we do is we look at transactional donor data. So we want to see each donation from the organization to file, and we also want to know for each of those donors, we want to know what media channel is available, email or print. Now, when I say donor, what we need access to is a donor ID. We need some sort of unique identifier. So you can imagine the data that you want to be looking at is all donations from your database with some sort of unique identifier, like a donor ID. And then we also want to know what channels are available. Is there an email on file? Yes or no. Is there a mailing address on file? Yes, no. And what we're going to do here in this first step is we're going to prioritize prospects based off of RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary value. RFM analysis has been around for decades now. It has its foothold really in the direct marketing space, but we can apply it here to this analysis, and it can be very valuable. And based off of the codes that we're able to capture from the RFM analysis, so we're codifying the file, we can group prospects into a best, high, medium, and low category. And then to determine our marketing mix, so how we're going to engage with these prospects, we're going to cross-reference the RFM scores with the constituents available media. I know this sounds like a lot, and let me get to the next slide in the case study. We'll distill it a little bit. It's a little bit easier. Once we've done all that, though, we can actually recommend an audience that we're going to do some engagement with. And remember, it's from that engagement that we're then going to understand kind of what the the temperature of our donor base is in terms of their consideration statuses, and that's what helps us with our model. Okay, so let's take a peek at what this actually looks like in reality. So Organization X, that's the name of today's organization that we're going to be working with. Okay, they have 479,000 unique donors in their file. Now they've already done some work. They have 154 Legacy Society members, 142 that are assigned to a planned giving officer portfolio, 184 that are assigned to major giving officer portfolio. So they've done some due diligence. They have some folks in some different segments. It's great. It's a big database, a lot of people. Now, when we've done and looked at the RFM scores, we can break them out into those four categories. So 824 out of the nearly 500,000 donors scored best. That means their recency of giving, their frequency of giving, and their monetary value of giving was codified very high, right? Now there's 68,000 that scored high. High is good. We want a lot of folks in high. And 300,000 in medium and about 110,000 in low. What that immediately shows us is that this database, these donors are pretty engaged with this organization. They don't have a lot of people who haven't given over, maybe the past 3 or 4 or 5 years. If they did, that would affect the recency of giving, and maybe more people would be in that low category. So you can already start to intuit a few things about this organization's database, and you obviously want to look at this for your database as well. And then we need to think about breaking this down by, again, those available media channels. So there's 69,000 records for this organization that actually have an email on file. Great. So of those 69,000 records that have emails, we can break them out again into their categories, the 4 cohorts: best, high, medium, and low. And again, you can see that kind of, the bell curve, a lot of folks in the middle there, high and medium, showing engagement with the organization. So then we can think about the online engagement strategy. And when it comes to sending out any type of media to anyone or any type of offer to anyone, digital is a very cost-effective medium. So we're going to say engage with everyone, engage with all 70,000 people, but don't necessarily go send an email blast out to 70,000 people right now. You might be overwhelmed with the response. So break that out over the course of multiple years, send on different dates to different segments and cohorts. But ultimately, what we need to do is we need to send some sort of marketing, which we'll get to in just a moment, to all 70,000 people, and we need to simulate or set an expectation for what the response rate is going to be, and then again break people into those 4 categories of already left a gift, showing interest, deferred interest, no interest. Getting a little ahead of myself, but you can see here we're going to engage all 70,000 people. Now on the print side, it's a little bit different. We all know sending a piece of mail is expensive. So we usually make these types of recommendations that you're seeing here. We only want to send that print engagement effort out to 5 or maybe 10,000 people, to a much smaller segment, even though this organization has hundreds of thousands of folks on file. Okay, so what's the summary here? What we're looking at is going out and engaging with about 80,000 people, most through online, again, more cost effective, some through print. And we're going to target our print to obviously those who have those best or high RFM scores. So that was all step 1. Again, very involved. It's simulating and thinking about, okay, how are we going to engage our database and break our database out by these RFM categories? Now we need to think about, okay, how will individuals respond? What will the response rate be when we do send something out to them? And also, what is that something? So when we do our work here at MarketSmart, we simulate response rates around a survey. If you know anything about MarketSmart, you know surveys and donor surveys, qualification surveys, they're a huge component of what we offer for our customers. So we have a lot of data about them. But you can think about this more broadly than just a survey. It could be your newsletter or your postcard. Whatever offer you send out to these 70, 80,000 people, we need to think about what's the response rate going to be. Now, we're in a bit of an advantageous position. We've done a lot of surveying for hundreds of nonprofits over the years. We've got over 5 million survey responses to date. Now, when you have that much data, you can start to come up with some baseline metrics. So generally what we use when we're simulating this, and you'll see this as we go through the case study, is about a 5% response rate. It's different for different verticals and sectors. And here today, we're talking a little bit more focused on higher education. Higher education, we can see that actually go much higher. Although within higher education, there's this distinction between maybe a big public university and a smaller, a religious or affiliated school or something like that. There can be big distinctions there. We see maybe in some of the smaller types of higher eds where there's a much higher level of engagement and response rates versus some of the bigger universities. With all that being said, 5% is what we're going to see here in the case study. However, as you can see here on the slide, use your own benchmark. If you send out, a newsletter with a reply slip about planned gifts and you get 1%, 0.5%, 0.1%, use that as your benchmark for your model, and you can actually adapt it and evolve it over time. You can simulate what does this look like with 1% response rate, 5% response rate, 0.1% response rate. So then once we've simulated what the response rate looks like to that engagement effort that we've sent out, we now need to think about where does where do those responses lie in the consideration stage continuum, really where people are in terms of their likelihood to make a planned gift to your organization. So these are the 4 categories that we use here at MarketSmart and that I would highly recommend you refer to as you build out and develop your model as well. So there's going to be a group of folks that have self-disclosed their planned gift, already left a gift. There's going to be individuals that show active interest, those that are saying I'm likely to make a planned gift or I want to talk to you about making a planned gift. Those that show deferred interest, so someday in the future I may make a planned gift. Those that show no interest at this time, those that are saying, you know what, I'm just not interested, thanks, but no thanks. So prospects will self-identify through the survey what their consideration status is. And again, if you think back to step 2, you're sending out some sort of effort. We need a way to then capture. And then obviously for the model, kind of create projections around what's the likelihood that folks fall into these 4 categories. Now, again, we are in a bit of a privileged position because we have all of that survey data from the hundreds of organizations that we've been able to partner with. And we'll get to it in just a moment here, kind of that breakdown of what does that look like? Where do people fall into those consideration stages across those 5 million responses? And for practical purposes, you can refer to our data in your model. It makes sense. You could use your own, breakout of consideration stages, but realistically, maybe you do have some data on that, but you're more than welcome to kind of rely on the information that we have access to. So just an example here, this is what we're talking about when it's a digital survey and we're talking about the consideration stages. You can see the question on the survey, where are you in terms of your likelihood to make a planned gift? So here's what we were talking about. This is kind of that privileged information. It's a good thing you joined us for today's presentation. This is that breakout. So you can see here, we've got our 4 categories up at the top, those that show no interest. So that means that someone responded to the survey and said, nope, I have no interest making a planned gift to your organization. The next tier down is deferred interest. So almost half of respondents are showing and saying, they're verbatim, I'm showing deferred interest. Not now, but in the future, I might be interested in making a planned gift to your organization. And then obviously a very small subset that pretty much raise their hand and say, you know what, I'm interested. I have interest today. Let's talk about my potential planned gift. And then an even smaller subset of folks that are actually letting you know, I've actually had you in my will or you're a beneficiary of some sort on my IRA or whatever it may be. They're disclosing that to your organization. So again, these are the distributions that we've been privy to and that what we're able to capture and what should be kind of translated into the model. Obviously, in our model, this is what we're reflecting, but you're more than welcome to refer to it as well. So let's look at this in terms of the case study, in terms of that organization that had nearly 500,000 donors. So again, we're going to simulate a 5% response rate. Remember when we looked at step 2, 5% is kind of our average response rate across our database of results. So remember on that previous slide that had the pie chart on it that showed digital versus print communications, we're going out to about 80,000 individuals. So we expect close to 4,000 responses. So then that breaks out into this chart. So from those 4,000 responses, we can project that 1,716 people will show no interest in making a planned gift. Almost 2,000 will show deferred interest in making a planned gift. 180 will show immediate interest, and 155 will disclose a previously undisclosed planned gift. So you can start to see here, this is where we're starting to, the ground is, we're hitting the ground running. We're actually making some progress here. We're saying we're going to send out some sort of marketing device, and we're going to receive this type of response. And this is that breakout. So if there's 155 gifts disclosed or 180 that are showing immediate interest, we can then start to take this to steps 4 and step 5 to actually come up with, well, how much potential does that represent for my organization? And that takes us to step 4 and step 5. So we've gone through kind of the heavy part of the presentation. Like, we have to do a considerable amount of work to get to this point. We really need to think about the value of our database and the types of distributions of consideration that are in our database. Again, back to the beginning of our presentation, you could just put 10,000 donors into our bequest calculator and it's going to tell you have $10 million in potential. And that's a good step 1. Again, we're here at kind of the more advanced level, really trying to build a case for support, why planned gifts are important, why legacy giving is important at your organization, and it's a bit more involved. So now we're going to project close rates, and we have to figure out what that average bequest value is. So when we talk about close rates, we can think back to that previous slide that showed the distribution of donors in those 4 categories, right? So we have some folks that have told us they have no interest in making a planned gift to our organization. So what's the likelihood then that at the time of their passing, they've made a planned gift to your organization? It's probably pretty low, right? Now, at the other end of the spectrum, if someone's told us, hey, you're actually in my will, what's the likelihood? What's the close rate that when they do inevitably, pass away, you're still in their will? Now, so what we're about to talk about with close rates, these are, bars and really variables that you should be able to control. The better we build relationships with our donors, the higher those close rates should be. So they're not meant to necessarily represent what you should or shouldn't do. It's an estimation and it's a projection of what you think is possible. We'll get into it with the case study. I think you'll see what I mean. Now, with the average bequest amount, there's national averages, Blackbaud, Target Analytics. Catherine Swink actually published a white paper that talks about averages being $35,000 to $50,000. However, amongst higher education institutions, that being closer and above $100,000. Now, if you have the capacity to within your organization, remember when we were looking at step 1, we were looking at the transactional donor data, and we were cross-referencing that with the available media. Well, if we just focus on the transactional donor data, we should be able to spot some planned gifts in there, and if we are, then we can actually calculate our own average planned gift for our organization, or we can rely on the averages. So over here on the left, focus over on the left where it says variable and then value. Variable. These are nothing new. When we were talking about the solicitable list size, again, there's the 80,000 number again. That's that original pie chart. Those are our digital and print media. That's the total number of people that we're going out to. The response rate, again, 5%. The total response, just what we were looking at a moment ago, nearly 4,000 individuals. Now, we've entered in here our average bequest amount, $35,000. Now, over on the right, these are our win rates. These are editable, right? These are variables that we control. And the values that we're showing here are not necessarily what you should anticipate you do, or maybe they're more what you should aspire to do if there's proper cultivation and stewardship and real genuine relationship building ongoing with individuals in your organization. So obviously a very low percentage will be one of that group that shows no interest, a small percentage from deferred interest, a high percentage from the other 2. And when we look at this for this particular organization, the case study that we're walking through, we see that there's actually close to $18.5 million in deferred plan giving potential from 529 potential legacy donors. So that's step one, or part one of today's presentation. Now we'll talk about, okay, of that $18.5 million, when does it actually come into the organization? One of the biggest hurdles that we are privy to here at MarketSmart, that we hear from so many of our clients and our prospects and our friends and our peers, it's across the board, is love it. We hear it all the time. There's a lot of money in planned gifts. Legacy giving is something that we really want to invest in. However, we don't know when the money's going to come in. It's really hard to convince leadership and the board that this is a worthy investment because we don't know when we're going to realize those dollars. And there's obviously validity to that. And we see it each year in the Giving USA report when there's peaks and valleys in legacy giving, simply because someone very wealthy could pass away. And there you go. There's a huge spike in planned gift revenues. But we can take a stab at, we can really, take a moment to project out when do these dollars come in to your organization. So let's continue down the case study path here. Let's talk about age distribution. So we need to understand what the makeup is of your organization's database. And again, this is the organization that we've been walking through this whole time. So hopefully you're seeing it's pretty interesting. They skew older, right? Almost, half, more than half of their database is between 70 and 89 years old. They obviously skew older here. So what does that look like when we start to project out planned gift revenues? Well, we're able to use actuarial life tables, essentially death probabilities, right? The Social Security Administration makes this information publicly available. If there's ever an institution or an organization that's concerned about when people pass away, it's probably like pension funds and the Social Security Administration. So the Social Security Administration puts out these death probability tables for men and women. And we're able to take that information, just like you're able to take that information, and you can project that out. So we can create these overlays, right, where we can have on our y-axis, we can have time. So we've got each year from this moment in time. And on our x-axis, we have an amount. And you can see for this particular organization, it's this, starting at the top and kind of dwindling year over year over year in terms of expected planned gift revenues. Now, why does the graph show like this? Well, let's go back for a moment. Because their database is incredibly old, right? If this distribution of ages showed a lot of folks at under 50, then we'd have a totally different projection. And in just a few moments, in a few more slides, I'll actually show you for a different organization, another anonymous client here, what that actually looks like. But again, the big takeaway here is if we know the ages, if we have reliable age data in our database, we can come up with this distribution. Okay, what is the distribution of ages in our database? We can cross-reference that with death probabilities, and then we can create projections for when those revenues are going to come in. Again, a lot more advanced than just plugging in a number into a calculator, and a lot more compelling, most likely, for board leadership, and even for yourself to just feel confident that the work that you're doing is going to pay off for your organization. And it might not be in year one. It might be in 10 years or in 15 years, but that's still valuable. And to be able to have that kind of transparency of what you expect to happen over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years can be hugely valuable to folks within your organization. Okay, so let's move on to step 2 or part 2 of today's presentation, which is projecting revenues from your legacy society. So this is very similar to what we just talked about a moment ago, except now we want to say, hey, we know that there's 100 people in our legacy society right now. What potential does that have in terms of realized revenues for our organization over the next 10, 15, 20 years? So here's the info that you need in order to calculate that. We need to know the total number of legacy society members, what's our average bequest amount again, and what are the ages of our legacy society members. And again, we'll use the actuarial table. We'll use the death probability rates to come up with our projection. So I'll show you an example here from a different organization. So they have actually a pretty substantial legacy society, a very substantial legacy society, 1,200 members. And again, we can't actually assume that everyone that's in the legacy society will maintain us, maintain that planned gift to us upon death. So we can simulate here a 95% close rate. And again, that's a variable that you should be able to modify. And we'll use the average bequest amount of $37,000 to kind of get our pool, right, of the total amount of money that's here within our legacy society. And then again, we can take those ages and we can come up with our model, or at least with our annual distribution. Y-axis, years from today, x-axis, dollar amounts, and this looks drastically different than the other case study we were looking at a moment ago. Why? Because the age distribution of the legacy society for this particular organization of these 1,200 people is younger than the age distribution of that other organization's entire database. Kind of crazy, but that's the reality of the situation. And we can, come up with these projections, and they're not necessarily going to be spot on. Someone could pass away that's leaving $1 million bequest, and that could definitely skew the numbers. However, this is a good tool and a good way to set expectations internally with your teams and with leadership about here's what the potential is, and here's our best guess, our most educated guess as to when that's going to be realized for our organization. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay, covered a lot of information in a short period of time. But the last thing here that I want to chat with you about is essentially everything that I've walked through and I've discussed. We do that here at MarketSmart. And usually it's not free. Usually, quite candidly, it's part of our sales process. It's definitely like, oh, you want to work with us? Great. Let's analyze your data and go through that rigmarole. We've actually decided that we want to make this more accessible, more valuable for the industry at large. We've been writing about it more frequently. You may have seen an article or two, and obviously we're conducting these webinars. So I want to talk to you about, if you're interested, for 5 people, so just 5 folks that have joined us today, we're going to do free opportunity analyses. There's no strings attached. We're going to analyze your anonymous donor data. We need donor IDs. That's the unique identifier. But we're going to analyze that data. We'll create a full report. We'll send it back over to you so that you can build a compelling case for your organization on if you should even be investing in planned giving, which realistically you probably should be, but the opportunity analysis will help paint that picture and really answer the why and also, what's the return on investment. We'll do that for you. We're set up. We have the infrastructure. We have the team. We have the willingness. And if you want that, there's a short survey after today's presentation just on the question that says, are you interested in a complimentary opportunity analysis? Select I am interested. I'll follow up with you via email. We'll coordinate the data transfer, and we'll get that rocking and rolling. That just about sums it up. So let me see if there have been any questions or anything like that as I've been moving and grooving here. Let me go to the chat real quick. Everyone's very talkative, so we have 0 chat. Let me double check the Q&A. It doesn't look like there are any questions that anyone's posed as well. So then the last thing I want to do is take up too much time out of your day. I could blabber at you for hours. That's not what you're here to do. Hopefully I've given you a few nuggets, a few ideas, a few thoughts. Like I said before, these slides and this recording will be sent to you, so you'll have access to that. And if there's nothing else at the moment that I can provide you with, then I'll get out of your hair. Hopefully you've enjoyed and taken something away from this presentation. And if not, you'll let me know on the survey. Oh, and we do have a question here. So what is the definition of donor for the initial calculator? Current year, last 5 years? So I think what this question is pertaining to is when we're talking about looking at the database at large, but feel free to type in as I'm talking if I'm not making sense. We want to look at all the transactional data within your organization's database. We want to not limit our view to people that just gave last year over the past 5 years. Planned gifts can come from anywhere, so we want to look at the share and type in, so all donors ever. Exactly. Planned gifts can come from anyone at any time, even outside of your existing database. So when we say donors and we talk about going through this process, we want to go cast as wide and far of a net as possible. So when we look at this data, when we think about step 1 that we walk through, thinking about communicating with people and the available media, we want to go as wide and far as possible. If someone donated in 1990 and they haven't donated again since, great. Let's at least run them through the RFM. Let's see what their RFM score is. Probably going to be low, probably not going to communicate with them, but let's at least bring them into the model so that we can include that data. More data, if it's clean, is a good thing. Okay, we had one question. I was hoping we'd have at least one, so thank you, Sharon. I'll get out of your guys' hair. I really appreciate your time. Hope you found this valuable. Feel free, let me know what you thought of today's presentation, and if we can help you with one of those complimentary opportunity analyses, be more than happy to. Hopefully the sun comes out here. Hopefully the sun's out where you are. enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thanks so much for your time.